All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. This is an amazing, amazing day. I'm very excited for the conversation. We have an amazing, I'm going to call him self-made entrepreneur, lawyer, business mogul. Mogul status now? I think it's getting there. And if you can't guess who I'm talking about Mr. Henry Schuck, CEO of ZoomInfo. Henry, thanks for joining me, man. I'm really looking forward to this.
Hey, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it should be good. So look, so the format that we've talked about this before is really just getting to know you. I think what we find is people learn the most from experiences, and the experiences of whenever we see people on top, we assume that life is easy. It's all linear. And the reality is life is not easy or linear. And so, we're going to go deep. We're going to get to know you a little bit. We're going to go back to La Crescenta, Cali, North LA. Is that what you would call it? North Glendale, North LA?
Yeah. North LA is right. People know Pasadena. So borders Pasadena.
That's right. So La Crescenta. All right. So we're going to go back. So grew up, born and raised La Crescenta.
Yep. Born and raised in La Crescenta, California.
I love it, dude. I love it. So tell me, what was life like growing up for you? What was life like, family life like growing up, becoming a Falcon at Crescenta Valley High School?
Jake, whoever does your research is very good.
Do you know famous alumni Will Wheaton from Star Trek: The Next Generation? In case
I did not know that.
There you go. That's what I'm here for.
The most interesting one I've seen recently is at the Grammys. The head of the Recording Association was a star basketball player at Crescenta Valley High School. But yeah, so I grew up in outside of Los Angeles. Raised by my mom, who was a nurse and worked a handful of jobs at any given point to raise us. I have a younger sister, and it's a pretty middle class community. I always felt like the poorest person in the bunch, which is, by the way, like a super interesting feeling to feel in your community, to always feel like a little bit less than everybody else around you. And my sister and I think always kind of felt like that in the community. We were like the community is middle class, and we were like the very bottom end of the middle class community. And, that probably does something to your psyche growing up. But I played sports in high school. I played water polo. I swam. I had a close group of friends that I kept in contact with. I was never like the most popular kid, and I was never like sitting by myself at lunchtime either. I was always like kind of somewhere in the middle. I was the kid who worked really hard and got good grades, but also was, affable. When we were prepping for this, Jake, I started thinking about my experience in high school, and the most formative experience of my high school year was I came into high school as a I started as a freshman, didn't really know many people. My friends from junior high school became like instantly too cool for me, which was a really like weird thing in my life.
Was it because of sports, girls? Like what was the?
I think it was probably girls. It was probably a combo of girls and sports. And I didn't play sports my freshman year until the end of my freshman year. So I didn't have as much of like a community. I was kind of off by myself for most of my freshman year. I was like holding on to these old friends I had from middle school who like stopped wanting to be friends with me, but I kind of kept trying to be friends with them. And then at the end of the year, I ran for something called like director of athletics, which was like a student government job. And I ran against a guy who was a junior who was on the football team and was super popular. And everybody told me it was like so dumb that I would even think of running against him. But I ran against him anyways. And I thought ran a clever campaign and got a bunch of people to vote for me. And I remember the night there was like a dance at night, and they announced the winners of this thing, and I won. I beat this guy. I felt like totally invincible at that point. Like, a freshman who didn't know anybody beat this like popular football guy. And my
what was the campaign? Do you remember the campaign? Like, what was it that stood out? Like, what were you doing? Like, what was the angle?
Yeah, I think my angle in general at the time was the campaign didn't really matter. It didn't matter how many like banners I put up or how great my speech was. I just needed to drag people to vote for me on the day of the campaign. So I think I bought a bunch of lollipops and I gave people lollipops to vote for me on the day of the campaign, on the day of the election, and they went and voted. So I just out-hustled. I just purely out-hustled him.
Right.
And that started a string of like moments in my life where I worked really hard for something, out-hustled somebody who should have done a better job than me, and then won. And like that kept on happening for the rest of my life from there, which just like, I don't know how many people get that experience where you work as hard as you can, and then you like achieve a great outcome from all of that hard work. And the reinforcement of that over and over in my life was like an incredible, it made me really believe that I could do anything that I wanted to. I just had to work as hard as possible to do that.
I love that, man. I think that's such an important message. What gave you the courage, man, when you think about that? Because that is, again, like you said, you were kind of often in a little island here early on, and you said, hey, I'm just going to go do this thing. I want to do it. What do you remember what sparked it, or what the initial, spark was?
I think I just felt like I didn't have anything to lose.
Right.
So I just, I didn't really have anything to lose. And I thought I could win. Yeah, I thought I could win. And then I think I probably also felt like the guy that I was going to run against was going to coast. And I was like an easy underdog. So you wouldn't put you really would underestimate me. And so I probably felt like I had a real opportunity.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that's such an interesting mindset. I mean, that requires you to think 2-3 steps ahead. And when you look growing up, is that a theme for you of just thinking like, all right, so if this domino falls, then this one will probably fall. And then this one, like, is that the processing power even back then?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if I was that thoughtful about,
at 14.
I often actually, it's super interesting because when I look at the younger generation now, they are much more thoughtful they seem more thoughtful than I was back then.
Sure.
Like I was just kind of like doing stuff and not really thinking so much about, the future implication of it or the next couple dominoes. I think the big thing was, for me there was, I just really believed in the value of hard work. And I just believed it would pay off.
Yeah. And that came from mom. From watching her work and
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've talked to a lot of folks, and I think that's a similar vibe, whether it was mom or dad, where you get a chance to see that. My mom woke up at 4:45, maybe 5 a.m. every morning, like clockwork, to go to a government job in downtown Kansas City. And, you don't, when you're I feel like you don't recognize it at the time, but that rubs off on you. Like at the time, you don't recognize it, but I hear that theme a lot. So then you graduate, good grades in high school, great grades in high school.
Good grades in high school. Yeah, I had great grades in high school.
Great grades. All right. So you go to UNLV.
right?
Yep,
And
because I thought I wanted to be a hotel manager. So I know like the grades don't exactly correspond with where I ended up for college, but I wanted to be a hotel manager, and UNLV had the best school in the country for hotel management.
Yeah. So you want to get into the hotel business. Why hotel business? Why is that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. I just at some point learned about it and thought it would be a really cool job to run a hotel. And that's what I decided I wanted to do. Yeah.
That's it. So then, all right. So you go to UNLV, right? So you play water polo at UNLV, right?
Yeah. It's a club team, but
club
yes.
team. Okay. So you play, you do that. You become the student body president, correct?
Yep.
Student body president. Okay. So let's talk about that. So how is this a similar campaign? Like how have things
evolved?
A similar campaign. How have the things evolved from the the director of sports at the high school to student body president UNLV, which I have to imagine is kind of can be an interesting race. So what was that process like? How was that different?
Well, the biggest difference was how I got there, which, I went to UNLV. I said I had good grades. I went to a college that didn't really match that, but I wanted to be a hotel manager. Kind of 2 years in, decided I didn't want to be in hotel management anymore. And then here I was at this school that was largely a commuter school. And my friends were like in these great University of California schools that had great communities, and they were living like very much a college life. I was working 2 jobs. I worked at the MGM and I worked at a company called iProfile. I was getting good grades in school, but I just became like really miserable at the fact that I wasn't having a real college experience.
Got it. Yeah.
And it all kind of crystallized for me when my boss at iProfile said, "Hey, let's go to Boston. I want to like visit Boston." I'd never been to Boston. I was 20. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's go. But I want to meet with some of our clients while we're there. So we set up these meetings with our 2 technology clients in Boston. We went off. I was 20. And then we went and visited Brandeis, which is where he went to college. And we also visited Boston College, which was, really nearby. And I walked on those campuses and I was like, oh my God, like I'm being robbed of a college experience because I went to UNLV. And I went back and I was just upset and like just negative about what was happening to me. And I was a total victim in this whole like story. And I just at some point decided like, okay, I'm going to need to feel better about this. So what am I going to do? So I signed up to go talk to a counselor at UNLV. They had like free counselors.
Yeah, sure.
So I went in just, all piss and vinegar. And the counselor goes, "Hey, can you think of the last time you were really happy?" Sure. I was in high school. What were you doing in high school? Like what activities were you doing that made you really happy? And I said, I was playing water polo and I was rollerblading. And now I'm 20. She's like, "Well, why don't you go do those things?" "Oh, it's hard to find a water polo club. I can't find one." And she's like, "Well, go look for one like seriously. And in a week, come back and you should probably rollerblade too while you're figuring this out." So I did. I went out, I like bought rollerblades, started like rollerblading, and then found a water polo club and went to the practice, went back like a week later. Right. And I felt like a completely new person, like totally re-energized. And then I also decided, you know what, if I'm going to bitch and moan about how much I don't like the UNLV community, then I should probably go try and do something about it. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to run for student body president. And I'm going to run because of 2 things. One, if I don't think there's a community here and there isn't like a real college atmosphere, I'm going to go try and create that for the people who want it. And then 2, to the extent I don't feel like it's a college experience, I'm pretty sure that if I'm the student body president at the university, it will feel like a traditional college experience.
Yeah.
And so I ran for student body president, and that was just kind of it. And I won.
And you won. Same thing. Did you have a big, again, similar story where, did you have a big following before that or big group of friends, or was it again, just hustle?
It was basically just hustle. I'll tell you what I learned during that process was, there's two ways you campaign for student body president, kind of anywhere. I think one is you put up flyers, you can speak in classes. Nobody really did that. And then on election day, you turn out the vote, right? Same lollipop motion, basically. So I decided I was going to speak in basically every class I possibly could. And so I would come to school on my days off. I had the whole class, every class that was taking place in every building. I knew what time each class started, who the teachers were, the professors were, and I'd wait outside the class when the professor showed up. And I go, hey, I'm Henry Schuck. I'm running for student body president. Do you mind giving me 3 minutes at the front end of your class to talk about my campaign? And, literally every professor said yes. And I ran this basically antagonistic campaign against the current student government that I was running against. And I spoke in almost 500 classes by the time from when I started to when I was done. I bounced all around the school. Now, there's an argument, and it was in my head that this doesn't really matter. No one's going to really remember you from these little meetings and then show up and vote for you. And everything that matters is on turning out the vote on the day of the election. And every time that thought came through my mind, I would just tell myself, look, if you're going to lose this election, you're not going to lose it because you didn't try hard enough. And in the run up to the day of the election, the way you can work as hard as possible is just running through these classes. That's the motion to run. Go to class and class and class and class and class. And so I just ran every day, class to class to class to class. It was a lot of fun, actually. And then won the election against the sitting vice president. But it was basically about having no regrets around not working hard enough. Yeah. I will lose fair and square, but I won't lose because I didn't work hard enough. And I won't look back and go, what if I did this? What if I did that? What if I worked harder? I'm just going to do all of those things.
Did you have a moment? I mean, I can relate to this. Did you have a moment up until that point? So, you're up into, 20, 21, getting to be 21 now. Did you have a moment where you did give up? Did you have a moment where you felt like you left it in the tank at that point? Was there a moment that happened before where you look back and go, dude, I just mailed that in? Or I know I could have ran that extra sprint or did something. Was there a moment before?
I don't have a recollection of a moment before where I just gave up.
Yeah, I wondered if there was that. I'll tell you, for me, I remember this like it was yesterday. It's my junior year in high school at basketball practice, and we're playing knockout. The game knockout where there's 2 balls, etc. And so it's a junior. I'm down. It's just down to me and this other guy. He's a senior. I am gassed at this point, just literally gassed. And I just kind of just spiked the ball down. I felt like I could not run anymore. And I was always in sprints, one of the first 4 or 5 people to finish. And I was just done. So I spiked the ball down real quick and the coach erupts. Just what? Did you quit? And I'm running laps now. I'm like, well, I guess that's not how you handle things, So yep. I was kind of not scared, but just reminded at multiple points throughout my career of there's no worse feeling than regret. There's no worse feeling.
Totally.
Even
100%.
An okay effort had I continued. But again, you can tell how that's burned in my psyche. I'll tell you an interesting one on this. And when I was in high school, I really wanted to make the basketball team. And I got cut my freshman year. Going into high school. And then I decided, but I stuck around. I was a team manager for a year on the varsity basketball team. And I stuck around. It gave me access to practice and learning more about the team. And at the end of that year, I decided to try out again. And I worked so hard. I was there at 5 a.m. for morning practice. I was there in the afternoon for afternoon practice. I practiced on my days off. And I just wasn't really getting much better. Regardless of how much effort I was putting into it,
the gap between my skill level, my height disadvantage, and everybody else's, I just wasn't making up. And at the end of my freshman year, while I was basically trying out for the basketball team, the water polo coach came into the gym and he was like, Henry, you work so hard. Forget about these guys. Come play water polo. Like, come play water polo. We'll take you on the team. Like, come now. And so that was how I decided to play water polo. I was like, I'm going to go play here. And it turned out that with water polo, and this is another really important lesson. I'll talk about it on my transition from law school to DiscoverOrg and ZoomInfo. But all of a sudden, that incremental effort was having exponential results for me. And it's like, oh man, this is what I should be doing. I could go work just as hard in basketball and get, small steps ahead. But here, the work that I'm putting in is being like instantly valued, and it's making me a much better water polo player than I could have ever become a basketball player. And so when you find a place where your efforts line up to results, that's magic. It is absolutely magic. And I feel like that, by the way, every day here at ZoomInfo.
Yeah. And what I feel like another nugget from that is there are times when you put in the effort and you don't know when it's going to pay off. So that's why you give everything 100. Because you don't know. You don't know when that mindset or that extra sprint or that extra call that you make or email you send or LinkedIn connect, whatever it is, you never know when that's going to happen. And sometimes and then I think over time, you just learn that those nights where you stay up. We did a big relaunch, rebrand in January. And, I stayed up at night. I had a tick sheet, Henry, of 500. I'm going to DM 500 people. And you never know the ROI of that. And I think for a lot of people listening, that's just a powerful example of you never could have known that. And I'm sure you never regretted it. And I think sometimes people look back at those moments and regret them, not realizing that you don't know what it prepared you for.
Yep, totally. 100%.
So you're working during this time too. All right. So iProfile, which I think is a great, kind of precursor for a lot of that. So how many hours a week did you work in college, roughly?
I worked, depending on the period of time, somewhere between 25 and 40.
Yeah. 25 hours, 40 hours a week, going full time.
During the summer, I worked 60 hours. I worked 40 hours at the MGM and I worked 20 hours at iProfile in the summers.
Yeah. And then you decide, so iProfile, for those who don't know, was the OG data.com, ZoomInfo, etc. So you got this little taste of it there. What did you love about that job, or maybe love or enjoy? Like, what did that job teach you?
Yeah. So it was me and the founder. It was 2002. He was selling a SaaS solution to sales and marketing people at technology companies. There was no other solution like that. I mean, imagine a world where there's no LinkedIn, there's no ZoomInfo, and you have to sell high-end technology to IT decision makers. Like, good luck. What do? You're completely reliant on the Rolodexes of your sales teams. And, if you're a company in California trying to sell to the 20 biggest companies in Michigan, you don't even know who they are, much less who the IT decision makers are and how to get a hold of them. And iProfile was doing a really great job of putting a data set together that was super novel at the time. And so what I loved about the job was it was software. We grew it from 300,000 in revenue to just under 5 million in revenue in 4 years. I got to see the entire operation from marketing to sales to contract negotiation to legal, because it was just me, the founder, and like 2 or 3 college kids at the time. And it really taught me how a business worked and how a recurring revenue business worked and how a software business that was making a transition from really like on-prem. When I started, we were selling CDs. We would sell you a burned CD.
Yes.
You'd send it in a mail. That was how you got iProfile. to transitioning to an online platform. So I got to watch all of that. And I was, 19, 20, 21. So it was just like this wonderful experience at a really young age. And it taught me, one of the jobs that I had was to order 10K reports from publicly traded companies and read through them to find like interesting nuggets that our customers would be interested in. And you can like the business education in those 4 years is just like through the roof. So I'm 21 and I have more experience in software sales and just understanding business models and sales and marketing in general than anybody my age. And so I had this incredible foundation that was built from that time.
All right. And so then you get this experience real world, but then you leave to become a nightclub. Do you leave to become a nightclub promoter? Like at what point do you say, hey, look, I'm in Vegas. Like it is what it is. Like before I go to law school, which I think we'll transition there in here in a sec. What was the reason for starting your own nightclub promotion business? And what was the name of it? And I want to know this, like that era of Henry. Yeah.
So interestingly, my boss at iProfile, who I went to Boston with, and we went around to those schools, was when I came back, I was like, hey man, yeah, it did look like you had an awesome experience at Brandeis. I think I'm going to run for student body president. And if I win, I can't work here anymore. And he was totally supportive of it. He even wrote me $1,000 check to fund my campaign.
Oh, that's awesome.
And after I won, I came back and said, hey, look, I'm going to take a year off. Maybe I'll come back at the end of this year and help out. Maybe if there are little projects on the side, but I want to dedicate my time to being student body president. So I left at the end of my student body president year. I decided I was going to go to law school, and I started studying for the LSAT, and I needed a job. And my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, her dad ran all the nightlife at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. So I asked her like, hey, I need like a job that doesn't require me to like think or like organize. So can you get me like a bar back job? I'll just like clean the floors and take the beer bottles. And those guys made good money. They'd make like $600 a night in those nightclubs. Like, give me one of those jobs. So she went and told her dad that I was looking for a job. Her dad goes like, come into the club tomorrow night at 10 and, I'll talk to you about what job you can have. So I come in, her dad is like blocked by like, layers of security at the nightclub. So I get there and I'm like, hey, I'm here to see Mike Milner. And they're like, yeah, okay. And they're like, what are you here to see him for? And I realize in my head, it's the worst answer.
Oh,
you could possibly
100%
tell
the worst answer.
the security guard. I'm here for a job. They're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
like,
right, man.
And so I finally convinced them to go tell him I'm here. He comes out. He takes me through like a backstage, walkthrough of Studio 54. And there's a big line outside. We go to this other club. And he goes, look, I know you asked to be a bar back, but I have a better job for you. You'll make more money. It's a better job. Da 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 da. And I go, okay, what is it? And he's like, you need to do nightclub promotions for these 2 nightclubs. I was like, oh my God, this is like my nightmare. It is exactly what I don't want. And how do I tell my girlfriend's dad, like, no, I don't want this job you think is better. I want the
back-breaking job.
The back-breaking, no thinking, like no stress job. And he's like, so I didn't. I go, okay, yeah, this sounds great. And I decide I'm going to go in and tell him I'm not going to take the job like a week later. Oof. And on my way basically in to go tell him, one of my friends says, you're an idiot. You should just let me do it. I will fill the nightclub and you will just split it 50-50. And so I decide, okay, fine, let's just do that. And so he does it, fills the nightclub. They're super happy. We make a bunch of money. And they're like, okay, well, what are you going to do next week? And so I tell my friend, like, can you do this again next week? And he was like, yeah, I can do it next week too. So he does it like kind of 2 more times. And then he was out, like his friends weren't showing up anymore. And so I just kind of built a business around it. I found other people. We would hang out like kind of inside the casinos, and we'd build a guest list for the nightclub for that night. And at one point we ended up having 35 employees. We had contracts at the MGM and the Mandalay Bay, at the Paris. And so we built a little, nightclub promotions business right before I left to law school.
And then what'd you do with it? So you go to law school, you go to Ohio State. Why law school? What'd you do with the business?
Yeah. So because, my co-founder would probably disagree with this, but I told him like, hey, let's sell the business to this one guy. Let's get all the paperwork in order. And he just never got the paperwork in order. So I went off to law school. I think I got like 2 royalty checks for 2 weeks. And then the guy who we sold it to was like, nah, this is my business now. You guys aren't getting any more royalty checks. And I called my co-founder, my friend, and was like, hey, did you get those papers signed? And he's like, nah, I never got them signed. So that was it for that business. And I was off to law school.
And that's where you learned the importance of contracts. And
the contracts are very important.
Contracts are important. Well, you're going to law school too. So why law school, man? I mean, obviously you've had success at different things. You had this kind of software sales experience early on selling. I love that was on CDs too. That's so good. And you know what it is? I just had a flashback too. There was the one that was Jigsaw. Remember Jigsaw became data.com, right? Where you would trade, you would enter in email addresses and you'd get credits. I'm thinking back to Legion back in 04, 03.
Totally.
So why law school, man? Why was that the move?
The very honest answer is that I believed it to be a noble profession. And that was kind of it. Okay. I thought you could do a lot with a legal education. It opened a lot of doors, and people would respect you because you were a lawyer. And I wanted a respectful role or job, profession.
Yeah. So I get it. And why Ohio State out of the different spots you could have went? I mean, it's obviously a great school. It definitely has that college atmosphere that
ding, 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 ding.
There we go.
That was a big one. I wanted a real college atmosphere. And then I wanted to go away from the West Coast. And so I applied to a bunch of schools on the East Coast and in the Midwest. And then I went and visited a handful of them. Ohio State was you couldn't imagine a better college environment. Yes. It was a 12 out of 10 on that scale. And then they gave me money. They gave me a handful of scholarships to go, which, by the way, just as a side note, over the last year, I've gone back and paid back with interest every scholarship I ever got. I got scholarships at UNLV. I got scholarships at Ohio State. I got a fraternity scholarship once. And it was really fun to call these places up and go hey, give me a listing of all the scholarship money I received. And then I'm going to apply a 20% per year interest rate to it. And I'm going to pay it all back to you for another scholarship. It's one of the coolest things I've had the ability to do
that feels
over
great,
the last
man.
couple of years.
That feels great. Why did you feel compelled to do that? What was it about that for you? Obviously, like you said, it helped you to probably during those times. Why did you feel compelled to do that? What was it that talked to you?
I mean, I think pretty simply, look, when you have some professional success, you should probably take some time to think about what things along the way were hands that helped you get to that point. And so I have spent time thinking okay, where did I get helping hands along the way that I should be investing back in now? And so the scholarships were big ones that were, real obvious monetary ones where they gave me money when I didn't have any. Yeah. And it would be really selfish for me not to go make sure that can happen to the next Henry Schuck that wants to go to law school. And so that was a big opportunity to pay that back. I mean, sometimes you think of when I think about philanthropy, I try to think about places where I can make a really big impact. The easiest ones to think about are places that made a really big impact on you. And so those ones are just they're the low hanging fruit when it comes to paying things back.
Yeah. And I think obviously you don't have to get to that level too, to just, and I know you've done that over the course of your career too, and been involved in a wide variety of different causes. So you don't go, so you start DiscoverOrg too, right? So during this time,
2007,
you're still in law school. So how did that work, man? Because I know law school is not, it's a difficult thing to do part-time. So tell me about that. What's the genesis? I mean, obviously iProfile had a little bit of probably influence on you, but what was the genesis of DiscoverOrg, and why did you decide to start it? And, what were those early years like?
Yeah. So, I was finishing. So the real story about law school is that it's especially hard your first year. My first year in law school, against every other year of my life, was the hardest year by like a 3x factor. And, that includes like the first year we had our daughter, and I was running DiscoverOrg. Like, of all the years in my life, that was the most difficult year academically and socially. So at the end of my first year, I was turning the corner at the end of my first year, kind of 4 weeks till the year ended. My friend called me, it was a friend I had recruited at iProfile, and said, "Hey, I want to start something that's like iProfile, but doesn't directly compete, and I don't know how to do it. So will you do it with me?" And I said, "Well, look, I got to finish my law school finals. So if you're still serious about this, call me in 4 weeks." And I just kind of figured 4 weeks, like that thought would pass.
Yeah, it's going to go away.
Yeah. But 4 weeks, like to the day, he called me and he was like, "Hey, I still want to do this thing. I want to do it with you." So I was like, "Okay, I'll throw up another like speed bump." Like, "Well, if you want to do it, you need to quit your job and move to Columbus, Ohio to do it. Like, I'm not going to do something that's not, that we aren't all in on." And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to put in my notice tomorrow and I'm going to like figure out how to make it to Columbus."
You're like, "Oh shit."
So he's like, "Oh shit.
I'm in this now."
Yeah. Like, I guess I'm in this thing. And so he did, he quit. He moved across country. I moved my law school classes for my next year in law school. I moved them to the evenings. And so I would start at 3 p.m. and I'd end at 10 p.m. So there were these night classes actually at a different law school that I figured out how to get credit for a class at a different law school in Columbus back to Ohio State. And they had a class that went till 10 o'clock. And I lined up my classes that way. And then we launched DiscoverOrg from my law school apartment in 2007. And we followed much of the learnings we had at iProfile along the way.
Yeah. What was the original company thesis? Like, do you remember what it was? Like, what you originally thought it would be?
Yeah. I think what we originally thought was, let's provide leads and contact information and profiles on companies in the, what we called sort of just outside the Fortune 1000. So like the Fortune 1000 to the Fortune 2000. And we're going to sell those to the sales and marketing departments of technology companies who want to sell to IT decision makers.
Yeah. So IT still. So selling into IT decision makers.
Yeah.
So who's doing this now? Like Dun & Bradstreet, right? They're probably like one of the company go-tos for that. Hoover's. Yep. Yeah. Hoover's, Dun & Bradstreet.
Hoover's, Dun & Bradstreet. Info USA was kind of there a little bit.
Yeah.
You did have Jigsaw at the time, had some traction, and that's kind of it. And nobody was particularly in love with anything, which was really unique. Nobody was raving fans of any of the solutions that existed in the market.
All right. So during that time, so then you graduate, and you obviously continue on, and we'll get into that. So law school for you, you invest this time, this energy. At what point do you decide? And I know that you do have your bar degree in Washington State, and I believe you have, there's something else you have, like a Supreme Court something, or?
Yeah. I'm licensed in Nevada and Washington State.
Nevada and Washington. When does the decision happen that you say, man, I've just invested all this time, all this money, and you're probably getting toward the end of law school. You've got this company now, it's a year or two in. What was that time like, where you then decide what you're going to do with your like grown up life? You have this company, you have this law degree. Are you married then? Are you married yet?
No,
we're
not married yet. Yep.
Okay.
We didn't get married till 2011.
Okay. So you're still not, but still, getting ready to move into that phase of life. What was that process like? How did you make that decision? How did you think about that decision?
So I think in this process, the the big moment where I had to make a decision about whether I was serious about DiscoverOrg or not. And by the way, like law school is certainly not a bad, it's not a bad fallback plan.
Right.
So like,
right.
you know, it's like you have this, oh, if this doesn't work out, I can always go be a lawyer somewhere. But the biggest decision was when you finish your first year and you go into your second year, the summer of your second year, the people who are going to get real legal jobs, they summer at big firms. Right. And so they do all of this on-campus interviewing with all the biggest law firms in the world. And then, you know, the best students get jobs at the biggest law firms. And they go in the summer and you make like 10 grand a month and they put you up and you have steak dinner every night. And it's like the way you become like you set the path to be a real like lawyer. And I didn't do any of it. I said like, no, I'm too busy and focused on DiscoverOrg. This is going to be my thing. I'm not going to do any of those interviews. And that like, when I told my friends in law school that, it was like, you know, the disgust character in the movie Inside Out. I don't know if anybody has kids who watches that. They were just like disgusted by the fact that you would like ever bypass this thing. And then, you know, DiscoverOrg was out there. So I just got like basically harassed for the next 2 years in law school for making that decision. They would go on the web, like my friends would go on the website. I use that term very lightly. And they'd fill out like the forms on the website and they'd say they're Arnold Schwarzenegger, or they'd make fun of the company name, or, and you know, it would come in to me and my co-founder and we'd see it. And it was just like this like cruddy experience.
Like, hey, you get like, that hot lead, Henry? You get that hot lead from last night?
Yep. And it's like, if you're getting your MBA and you go start a company, everybody's your fan, I think. Yeah. When you're getting your law degree, you're around a bunch of risk averse people. Like they're literally designed to like mitigate risk on things. And this to them felt like the most risky thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, I can see that. So you get the degree, you finish though. And then what year do you move to Washington? Is that right after?
I moved to Washington, in 2009.
2009, that's what I thought. So right after you moved to Washington, co-founder moves with you.
Yep.
Well, obviously, he's like, wherever Henry goes, I have to go. Henry drops the hammer. Hey, by the way, and we're moving to Vancouver, Washington, right?
Well, actually, I moved here for him.
Oh, did you really? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, because I dragged him out to Columbus. He's from Portland, Oregon. And I was like, well, you know, like I dragged him here. There's horrible winters for the last 2 years and I could go anywhere. So I'll just go to Washington.
Oh, that's great. All right. So you go and you start to build this thing. And, you know, we talked about, you know, kind of those first few years. And then we talked about really the period from 2011 to 2014, you know, that kind of moving it into where, hey, you know, we have something here. It's starting to move. You know, do you remember, you know, going into like 2011 after the first years, like what were revenues like? What was, you know, where were you at before you hit kind of that first spurt?
I used to be able to do this really well. But so our first year we did $800,000. We did $300,000 our first year, $800,000 our next year, $2.7 million the next year. So that would have been 2010, $5.5 million in 2011. 15 million in 2012. And then I think 2013, we did something like 25 million. And 2014, we were on our way to like, you know, north of 35 million of ARR.
Yeah. So you it starts to get real, right? That 2011, that 5 to 15, you know, 5 to 15, I think is the first big one for a lot of folks.
5 to 15 just happened. Like, when I think about 5 to 15, that was probably the easiest growth spurt in the company because getting to 5 was hard. It took time. You had to really understand the motion. 5 to 15 was like, if you just added a couple of smart people on the sales floor, you could get to 15. And we did. We just added a handful of really great salespeople and it like you magically finished the year at 15 million. And you're like, whoa, that it felt like the most effortless period of growth.
Yeah. You got that initial flywheel where you're still running through kind of the early adopter innovator to where you can get to 15, 25. Okay. So I think at this stage, this is the point whereas you're building a software company. And obviously what you did, you did a hybrid for a while, of like a people and software, or I'd say it's still, there's elements. What about venture capital money, man? Before this, let's talk, because obviously we'll talk about, when you did decide to take money. I would say you are in the sub 5% for sure, maybe, of people who start to build a software company or a tech company and don't take, or don't think of that as like the W, like, oh, we raised 20 million from Excel. We raised 50 million from Insight. All great firms and a great way to scale. What were those conversations like then? I'm sure you had them. I'm sure like that was a period you're like, hey, we're at 5 million. Like this thing's got serious here. Like, what were those conversations like in that like 2011 to 2013 where you're growing, it's growing quickly? What were the conversations like, and what made you decide to not take money and keep making money?
So the easier of those two answers is, I just didn't really like the people I was meeting at VC firms. And we had these conversations and they just felt like basically valueless. Like, well, I don't understand what value you bring to our company other than giving me money that the business was profitable and growing. So it didn't particularly seem like I needed outside funding. And then the way that they get in your head is basically tell you, your business is about to fail because we have this other company that's about to take over your market. And I was always just like really put off by those conversations. Yeah. And so I didn't really love the venture capital people we were meeting, and I didn't need the money. So we just kind of kept plodding along in the business. And then you get to a point where if you have a profitable and growing business, you have an opportunity to, at scale, you have an opportunity to put all of your financial worries to bed for the rest of your life. And we saw an opportunity to do that by bringing in a private equity investor, while that also gave us, hey, we took a big round from TA Associates and we get to kind of be a formalized entity and build a board and have the like learnings of that firm. But in the meantime, we also get to, take a bunch of chips off the table, put a bunch of money in the bank, and not have to worry about our personal financial situations being completely wrapped up in the business. And so we didn't really need venture capital to run the business. And so financing for us ended up being viewed as an exit or a financial exit for us. And so in 2014, when we took money from TA Associates, it was a combination of both, hey, how do we take some chips off the table and get a financial exit while also formalizing the company?
Yeah, and I think too, with your mindset, when you were able to move to the PE world, it's you want to run a profitable company, and so do they, right? They have invested interest to run a profitable company and not put applied pressure to scale, whether the model's scalable at that point or not. And I think
super interesting, by the way. It's much more common in today's world to take a PE round, like the Vistas and the Thoma Bravos and TA today. Those are real avenues for people who are building software businesses. But in 2014, people were like, private equity money. Like, why'd you do that?
Yeah, like that's not cool.
Not cool. Definitely not cool.
Not cool. Wait, like real bank money? Like, isn't that you're supposed to wait till like your Series D or E to do that or something? Or have some of those folks, Tiger or somebody, come in. So you go to this next phase. You take a round. Round was 100 million.
It was a $275 million valuation at the time.
270. Okay, we'll just go with that. We won't go with the round. So we raise a lot. We have a nice valuation at that size, right?
Yes.
And we're going into this next phase of growth. So now we've got some powder here, right? I met you guys I met you in 2015. We were talking about this earlier. 8 salespeople in 2015, right? How many salespeople now? Fast forward.
800, if you include kind of our account management, SDR, account executive, CSM teams.
So what was the big learning at that phase? So that 2014 to 2017, you kind of described as like the next growth. Just, kind of quick question there is, what were the takeaways? What was the toughest time? And, what were some of your big takeaways from that next phase of scaling, of growth, as you go from, oh, wow, okay, we got a board now. We've got these people, we have money. Oh my gosh, I have like a lot of employees now. What was the toughest maybe learning and biggest takeaways during that period? Yeah.
So you can think about that period, like 30 million to 100 million. Mm-hmm. And if you're thinking of 2014, we're at 30 million, we're growing our way to 100 million. The biggest learning there was really understanding the rhythm and the metrics that make the business successful. And, pre 2014, it's like I came in, did a bunch of stuff, the business grew.
Yeah.
And I came in the next day, I did a bunch of other stuff that I thought was important, the business grew. 2014 and beyond was like really understanding what that bunch of stuff was and what it meant to the business, and then tracking it all so you knew which bunch of stuff you had to do to lead to the outcomes that you wanted. And so we just layered in a set of business metrics throughout the organization that really mirrored the rhythm of the business. Run this many SCM and SEO campaigns, run this many outbound calls, set this many appointments, it leads to this outcome. And then tracking that very closely across the organization. That, like, you don't build $100 million business and not run it off of metrics. And you certainly don't build $100 million profitable business that's not being run off of data and metrics. And so we were like junkies for the metrics on the business. We made we turned our CFO, we hired a new CFO who, if you're a $30 million business, often your CFO is like an accounting person.
Yeah.
But the CFO we hired was a strategic business operator. And we said, look, you're not valuable to us unless you're giving us good insight about the business we're running and things that we could be changing or doing better to make it run better. And so that was the motion. You knew what the business needed to do every day of the month, every month of the quarter. And then you went out and constantly optimized for that.
Yeah. And I think that for a lot of folk, whether it's for you or somebody listening and you're at 30 million, or maybe it's 5 million or 10 million for you, that the hustle is the most important early. Like building a profitable, good thing is what's important. So we go to this phase. What did that phase teach you as a leader? What was the most humbling during that phase? So you're going to run this KPIs and, you're making this transition. What was the hardest part for you as you're going from this person just worked and made it happen to now I'm like metrics guy. And I'm sure you're like not as much doing those things. You're looking at spreadsheets and data more frequently.
That's a hard transition for anybody who's like an executor. And, when you're in execution mode, you feel your value, right? It's so tangible. Mm-hmm. Like I did this, it turned into 300 leads, and then this happened. I took these 20 calls, I converted 10 of them to deals, I generated revenue. And the transition from like your ability to do something and instantly see the results of that work to a world where you're kind of directing and hiring people and watching metrics and counting on everybody else to do the job, that is really hard. And I like hated it. I really hated it. And you'd go home after a day of work and you'd be like, man, did I do anything today? Right. Or, because in my previous life, you never went home like that. You were always building a new piece of content, rewriting a page on the website, redoing the form, building a new marketing automation campaign. Then all of a sudden, you're not doing anything like that. You're just kind of managing. And so I spent a lot of time just making sure that I was working on the things that were the highest priorities in the business, and then getting really comfortable with the fact that like my job then was really to coach up the people in the organization around me, and then pay attention to the place where the business wasn't executing and try to fix those places constantly. And you often just fix those places by hiring great people. But that was, that shift. You just got to know, like, you're the CEO at a $50 million company is just not doing the same things as the CEO at a $20 million company. And the CEO at a $100 million company is not doing the same things as the CEO at a $50 million company. And as long as you're convicted about the fact that you want to be that next CEO, you gotta like continue to evolve your role. My role today is so different than my role a year ago. And my role a year ago was so different than my role a year before that. And that is a tough motion when your business is scaling and your organizations are scaling. And so your responsibilities are constantly changing.
How do you get ahead of that? Right. So I think what happens at times is people bring in people from the outside, or, you surround yourself with the right people. There's a lot of different ways to make it through. How do you feel like, because obviously you had the foresight for some of this, and not necessarily to know exactly how it was going to change, but to know, one of the things we talked about, who I am today isn't who I'll need to be in the future. And how do you go through that process, especially like in those stages, because I think that's one of the biggest mental leaps, is that leap from executor to, oversee, like, oh wait, they don't need me anymore.
Yep.
Get out of the way and let people do their job. Like, how do you prepare for that? Or how do you think about those next steps?
I think, first of all, two things. One, I think you just know, and I'll come back to that point, but the easiest way is you're constantly upgrading or up-leveling your talent. And so when you're doing that, all of a sudden, less and less of the operational requirements that you were responsible for are you still responsible for.
Yeah.
And so as long as the staff in sales and the leadership in sales and marketing and product and finance is constantly getting better, either by getting better themselves or by bringing in upgraded talent that makes the whole organization better, you just start naturally being able to step back. They don't really need me anymore, running a campaign in marketing, and like, I'm just getting in the way. And so how your job becomes like, now, how do I spend that extra time? Where in the business do I spend that extra time that gives the business the most value? So I'm thinking about that all the time. By the way, along the way, I had lots of people on my board being like, well, Henry, your job now should be much more strategy. You should be a strategy. That's what a CEO's job is at a size of your company. And, that's okay advice to have bouncing around your head. But when you should be doing strategy and what the business needs. Like my business, when I was getting that advice, did not need me doing strategy. It still needed me in execution mode. And it was great to have a vision to get to a place where I was going to be strategic, but involved hiring the right people, up-leveling the right people, upgrading the people in the right organizations, until you got to a point where, I am today, where I do spend a lot of my time on strategy. But 2 years ago, no, that's not what the business needed. And so it is a lot about hiring the right people.
Yeah, I think so many people need to hear that, right? You see so many people trying to get out of the weed. I'm going to hire this person, and now they're going to do no, nobody's going to do it for you. Nobody's going to, when it's your business in particular, even if they've got a stake or not, I think too many people, again, like that's the glamorization of entrepreneurship is, you're just sitting in a boardroom and thinking, and you're doing these things, and like magically these really smart people just do all the stuff, and you just contemplate in, Palo Alto or something. Like, I feel like it's one of probably the biggest failures for people who think they want to be entrepreneurs and to start a business is understanding like, no. you're still grinding for a very long time, and it just it changes a little bit. And then once you get to a certain stage, right, then it will truly becomes strategy. But still, I guarantee if I pulled up your email right now, right, I guarantee you are fighting there is something going
100%.
down.
This morning, this afternoon, there are fires I'm putting out all over. But I think the other thing is there's this, I'm not the biggest fan of the show Billions, but there's this comment in the show Billions where they ask a guy who used to work with the main character Axe, who's this billionaire hedge fund manager. They go, tell me what a day in the life of Axe is like. And one of the things he says is like, these guys are like kings. Someone is always coming to kill them. And I remember watching that and being like, oh man, that is often how I feel when I'm doing strategy. Is like, I'm thinking about who is ZoomInfo going to be 2 years from now? And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, who's going to come try to kill us? And how do I make sure that we're making the right decisions today and the right investments today to fend off any of those flanks in the future? And so, someone, you wake up, the company's really big. I'm not like doing marketing campaigns anymore, but I am constantly thinking about who's going to come and kill us tomorrow and how do I make sure we don't get killed? Yeah. And that's stressful, by the way.
Of course it is. Yeah, because now the stakes become more and more and more real. And but I do guarantee, I bet if I looked at your marketing team's email, there's Henry suggestions or ideas.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure that because the brain never, when you grow up like that, I don't think the brain ever fully turns off. So we're gonna try to wrap up here in a sec, but so let's fast forward to the ZoomInfo. I love that the fact that you went back and acquired iProfile in 2015. That's just such. Yep. My guess is at this point though, no CDs. Can I assume that they
weren't no CDs?
You did not acquire a CD Encyclopedia Britannica type business. Then
no, but I could burn and stamp those labels though. If
I love it. And I remember this in 2017 when you acquired Ranking too. I remember that was a moment for me. I'm like, oh wow, okay, like because I knew Ranking, what those folks were doing over there. And then Data.com goes away. It's kind of ZoomInfo. I followed them very closely too. Obviously as a sales consulting company, data is an issue for almost all of our clients. And so ZoomInfo had started to make some really big improvements, right? They'd started to really up level that product, and then you acquire ZoomInfo in February of 2019. What was that moment like for you? Like, what was that like? Do you remember what you were like that moment whenever you're like, we're getting ready to acquire ZoomInfo, who was the biggest competitor, right? At the time? I mean,
at the time. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I'll tell you, when we acquired Ranking, which was a few years earlier, we were in a dogfight in every deal with Ranking. Like we woke up every day thinking about Ranking. And so the moment we acquired Ranking, it was interesting. These are interesting moments because you've put together a plan for how you're going to execute in the business. And it's usually pretty aggressive. So you don't really have a moment to be like, whoa, we did it. We bought a competitor. Yeah. It's more like, okay, go. You got to get all these people on board.
Yeah, and how you got to merge this.
Yeah, you got to merge this thing. So you don't get a lot of like opportunity for nostalgia. But I remember when we bought Ranking, my CFO goes, hey, Henry, just know, no matter what other successes you have in your career and what other companies you buy along the way, this will be the best, most fulfilling moment of your career. And I was like, that is a really interesting perspective because, we started the company, we fought with these guys every day from founding the company to the acquisition. But ZoomInfo was a little bit different in that it wasn't that competitive. We kind of played in different spaces.
Yeah.
But what the acquisition took two 500 employee companies, made it 1,000 employee company. And it felt big. You felt really big when that acquisition happened. And I was a good 500 person CEO, but I wasn't a good 1,000 person CEO. I had to learn that like on the job overnight, basically. And the world just changed really fast. The needs of 1,000 person business are just so different than the needs of a 500 person business. I basically knew everybody at a 500 person business. In 1,000 person business, it was much more challenging. And so you had to like learn on your feet. So So very lots to learn when you're putting those two businesses together. I took the first 3 weeks to just try to understand their business, which turns out was just like the business I was running at DiscoverOrg, but wanted to be sure of that.
With a little more of a Boston vibe, maybe, right? Like
a little bit more of a Boston vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we were off to the races.
Yeah, man. And now here you are. So as we wrap up, what keeps you up at night going forward? So you talked about the king always being, what sectors are keeping you up or excite you the most, right? Maybe to flip it and we'll go the future route here, right? You acquired Neverbounce too a little bit after that. What do you see as the future of this space? What's as you think about your next chapter for the company, what gets you excited when you're talking to analysts, when you're, talking to the company?
Yeah, I'll tell you a big shift that happened. When we were thinking about who we were often thinking like, we're a data company. We sell company information, intent information, contact information. Our customers need data. And then over the last few years, I think what we realized is we are building much more than just a data platform. We're building a modern day go-to-market stack. And that's has a foundational layer of data on people and companies and what they're searching for and what they're buying that feeds the rest of the software stack. And so when historically I was paying attention to all of the company and contact data providers, the opus is much bigger now. I'm looking at what are all the go-to-market platforms that our customers are using, that sales and marketing professionals are using every day to go to market. And then how can we better deliver that by having it unified under ZoomInfo, layered in with our data asset. And so it's just a bigger universe to look at and understand. And so I would say, look, what keeps me up at night today is, do I understand that much bigger ecosystem so that I'm making the right strategic decisions, either from an M&A perspective or a build perspective, to make sure we're positioned really well to be that modern go-to-market platform.
I love it. Modern go-to-market platform. Yeah, because the data, you're like, well, we kind of did that. Like the data.
The data is great. We're constantly making it better, but it feels like we're best in class there. And so how do we leverage that data asset now?
I love it. Well, look, man, I appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun, man. And I think there's a lot of different, I took some notes here about different themes, and I hope you had a good time too, Henry.
I did. I really did.
Reliving a little bit, being your days, your Falcon days. All the way up to, the man you are now and the company you're running now. And I think it's an exciting vision. So, Henry, thank you. I appreciate you. And we will see everyone on the next episode of the Jake Dunlap Show.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.